Got an emergency whistle with me this morning. I got it. It's really cheap and really loud for emergencies. Never had to use it. Or rather, I didn't have it with me if I did need it. But when you're out there in the woods or something and plane crashes and you got to build a fire, we're rubbing sticks together, and you got one of these, 3 sharp blasts is what the instruction manual said, and that signals that you need help. After our first kid was born, Colin, he's raising his hand. Thank you. I remember being really tired all the time. And it didn't get much better with the second and the third. It was that sweet, sweet time after a couple of weeks, maybe it was longer, where he finally started to sleep all night. Now, it wasn't like I had to get up and do a whole lot when he was upset at night and hungry. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot I could do. He didn't want what I had to offer anyway. But it was always interesting to me, though. That's probably not the right word to use, interesting. But really, if I was being honest with you, it was probably more dread. In the middle of the night when you hear that cry, you're like, I've only been asleep for 2 hours and I got to get up in a couple. And it didn't stop, did it? It's always like that. Anytime you hear that cry, you know it's your kid. It could be in a room full of kids. And it's like I've drowned out every other kid's cry except for mine. I don't hear it. I don't hear other people's kids being noisy. I don't even really hear other people's kids being rowdy and disruptive. But I know when my kid's doing it. I know the sound of their cry. And if Dad can hear the sound and know the sound, then you guarantee that Mama knows. Mama knows the sound of that cry. She knows the difference between a fake cry, and my kids were masters at that. The fake upset, not really, but I'm going to pretend like I am, versus the real deal. Uh-oh. What happened? Colin's been stunned in the middle of the forehead. Henry fell off the monkey bars and broke his arm in half. We know that cry. We hear it, and we come running. Well, at least moms do. The other day, this is off the subject here, I guess, but a couple weeks ago, the kids decided they wanted to go swimming. Well, it was like 60 degrees in the water. And they were all excited because it was 85 outside, but the water was still really cold. And Teddy decides he's going to jump in, which he can swim pretty good. Well, he did not swim very well that day. I mean, it was like a rock. And could not move, he was so cold. And I'm thinking, man, I got to take my watch off, my wallet, pull that out, my phone. I don't need to ruin that. I mean, it's not like he would have been in the water for another 5 seconds. You can't drown in 5 seconds. I could see him. But Aunt Jenny, a mama, not his mama, but a mama, I mean, she comes from behind me, jumps in to save him. And me and my brother Brian, we just sort of look at each other. I'm like, all right, I got to stay warm and dry. Usually, though, if you're not me, parents come running at the sound of their kids' cries. They hear it and they come running. They want to help and take care. What kind of parent? Really, I would have gotten in after him eventually. What kind of parent would just sit back and be like, well, I guess you'll figure it out. I guess you'll have to learn how to feed yourself. Or I guess you'll have to learn how to take care of that sting on your forehead now and your face is swelling up. Oh well. Shake off that broken arm, you'll be all right. What parent does that? Israel was just like a little kid. They would cry, and God would come and help. Time and time again, we see this. We see this happening on a regular basis. And it almost gets to the point of embarrassment. Where it's like, hey, at some point, aren't you going to grow up? I mean, even as I imagine your children get older, the problems that they once had, the crying in the middle of the night. Once when Colin was a baby, I would go in there to see what was going on. But now, if he was to cry out in the middle of the night, I would just probably roll over and figure he's probably having a bad dream. If it happens again, I go in there, hey, what's going on? Well, I had a bad dream. Okay, go back to sleep. You're fine. You'll be okay. It's not as urgent. You expect them to grow up a little bit and be able to take care of themselves and start learning from some of these things. But Israel, it was like they never did really learn. They never figured it out. They had problems in Egypt, and God heard their cry, and He rescues them. He sends these plagues to convince Pharaoh or to show his might, and then Pharaoh lets his people go. And they go out into the wilderness, and they start their march. And we've talked about this briefly, but we see there in Exodus, as they're leaving, almost from the get-go, before they even cross the Red Sea, they're having these problems. But Israel never really struggled. They were never in real danger. It's kind of like going out and sitting around the pool, and there's 4 adults for every 2 kids. And they're attentive, and they know what's going on. And that kid's not going to be in any real danger. Or a baby crying in the middle of the night because they're hungry. They're not in any real danger of starving to death. The parent's going to come and they're going to feed them. That's Israel. Time and again when they would complain, we're hungry, we're thirsty, we're tired, God took care of them every time. And yet they still found it difficult to wrap their minds around it. We see in Exodus chapter 15, verse 22 and thereabouts, they show up and they're grumbling because they're thirsty. What are we going to drink? And it's always an emergency with them. It's always the end of the world. You brought us out here to die, Moses. Were there not graves enough in Egypt? We sat around the meat pots and were full all the time, and we had bread and fruit and vegetables. Really? Because you remember being beaten and starved to death, right? You remember being enslaved and not having any time to do anything. You remember that just a couple of weeks ago. We're not talking about generations here in the wilderness. They had just left, and they get there and they don't have any fresh water. And so God takes care of them there. And then we see, and the same thing happens in 17, and it's like it's always water with them too. They never have enough water, even though they make some bitter water sweet there in 15, and they don't have water, and Moses goes out there and he strikes the rock and water comes out. And even when he's told to speak to the rock and he strikes it anyway, water comes out. They always have water. They're always given water. So why the problem here, Israel? Why are you always complaining like you're never going to get any? We see God providing food for them in Exodus 16, where they're hungry and they're complaining. And so God sends manna and quail. And they go out every morning. They have this stuff on the ground that they collect, and they can cook it a bunch of different ways. But the description in the Bible is like they made cake out of it. Can you imagine having cake every day that all you have to do is walk outside your tent and collect it for the day? Cake every day. And quail, as far as the eye could see. And yet they still manage to complain about the quail, because later on, God gets sick and tired of them complaining, and it even says there that they looked with longing back at Egypt and wanted to go back because of the meat pots and how much food and how great it was. And so God decides, I didn't put this one down here, I just wanted to tell this story. But God decides, fine, you know what? I'm going to give them food until it comes out of their nose. And so he sends quail, and I think it said like 2 miles all around the camp, stacked on top of each other. And so they go out, and while they're eating it, while it's between their teeth, he turns it poisonous. Pretty good practical joke if you ask me, but some of them died. He was so angry. It even says that their clothes didn't wear out. In Deuteronomy 29, verse 5, I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out. Your sandals have not worn off. Can you imagine? I mean, you ever get those nice, good pair of shoes? And I'm like this. I don't know. I like getting a new pair of shoes. But I've always got like this sad feeling. Or I remember when we first bought our house, and it was a new house. Nobody had ever lived in it. And I remember going in and seeing it, and there was no scuff marks. The floors were all clean. Okay? There wasn't dishes in the sink that needed to be cleaned. The bathroom fan hadn't broken. Okay? There wasn't all the messed up places where I'd started a project and got confused and couldn't figure out, and so I leave these holes in the wall. None of that had happened yet. And I remember thinking, man, I wish it could just stay like this. But as soon as I move in, it's going to start falling apart. Imagine always have your clothes never wear out, and your shoes always stay in. Israel had that. And yet they still couldn't figure out that God was going to take care of them. As for basic faith and trust in the Lord to take care of them, they had none. Every time God would provide for them, after they would complain, and then as soon as the next problem came up, they would start complaining and act like God had turned his back on them all over again. As soon as they had left Egypt and the plagues, and they get to the place where God had told them to camp, and the Egyptians start coming in, and they see them, and they're like, whoa, we're going to all die. And God said, I'm going to take care of you. I will be with you. I heard your cry before, and I will be with you. Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. We see this response to Israel being in captivity for all those years. And God saying to them, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their suffering, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. And it wasn't even that they just left and they looked like slaves when they left. God did it right. I mean, it was almost like a humiliation for Egypt. He punished them. And then while they left, they got all their riches. They just asked their neighbors, and their neighbors gave them gold and silver and all this stuff. So Israel left like kings, feeling good. And yet they go out into the wilderness, and time again, act like God is not going to take care of them. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being in that situation? Knowing the things that God has just done, how he is literally miraculously taken care of. And then the very next problem that comes up, oh man, we're all going to starve. We're all going to die. We're going to run out of money in the bank. Oh, look, the gas tank's coming up on E. We're probably going to be stranded on the side of the road, and bad guys are going to come up and steal all our stuff. That's what Israel did. Every single time. They come after wandering through the wilderness, after being led around the long way. They come to Canaan land, the promised land, and they send spies in. And the spies came out and said, we can't beat these guys. We better just head on back. Let's figure out who can lead us back to Egypt. Because we can't conquer these giants. And several times, throughout the wanderings, and after that even, we see God talking with Moses, specifically in the wilderness wandering, but then later on other leaders. But here we see God having this conversation with Moses. I'm regretting having these people brought out of Egypt. I'm going to come down and watch out. I'm going to destroy all of them. And I'm going to start over with you. See God having that conversation, and Moses saying, look, don't do that. It'll make it look bad. It'll make your name look bad to the people that they came out here and died. And God would relent. And you could almost sympathize with the people if it weren't for the fact that in this timeline here, there's not that much time. It's not like this was over decades. When they came to spy out the land, it hadn't been that long. How could they forget so easily? How could they forget how God took care of them? How could they forget that every time they asked, God was there to help them provide? Before they asked, God knew what they needed. And yet they continued to act as if he was unwilling to take care of them. failing to remember his power, leaving Egypt when they got thirsty, when they got hungry, when they left Mount Sinai there in Exodus chapter 33, verse 3. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. God sent his word in this scene here. The God the Father, I'm telling Moses, I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be there through my son, the word. Because if I'm there, I'm going to get rid of all of you. Because I can't stand to be among you. At one point, God sends fire out around the camp and starts consuming people. Because he's so angry at how they're responding, how they're grumbling against him through Moses. After spying out the land in Numbers 14, they complain, why is he bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation and the people of Israel. And then Joshua and Caleb, they speak out against it. And eventually God just gets tired of it. Several times. But we see here in what I want to come to, the crux of it. It's not the last time, but I'm going to use it as an example of God just getting fed up. In Numbers chapter 21, we see Israel complaining. I'm not going to really talk about exactly why. It was probably over water or something. I didn't put it down. Tired, thirsty, hungry. Fill in the blank of the common complaints that they always have. And they set out on the way to the Red Sea to go around to the land of Eden. And the people became impatient on the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us out of the land of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no food and no water, and we loathe this worthless food. The manna they're talking about. Complaining about the free lunch. Then the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people so that many people of Israel died. And the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away this serpent from us. The serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And everyone who is bitten will see it, will live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a pole. And if any serpent bit anyone, he would look at the bronze serpent and live. I remember learning about this as a kid, and it terrified me. It terrified snakes. I can't imagine being out there and these snakes being around. And I remember the picture on the little felt board of these snakes everywhere. And the people of Israel, laying out on rocks and trying to look up at this fiery serpent, this copper or bronze serpent on this pole, and thinking, that is terrifying. That is unimaginable for me. Like Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, where it's the flashback. And he's on the circus train and he falls into the reptile trailer. And he's in this pit of snakes everywhere. And he's pulling them out of his shirt when he gets on top of that's terrifying to me. I can't imagine this scene. And it's not long into the journey. And we see Israel surrounded by these snakes. And it's at that point where they decide, whoa, God can take care of this. Let's go to Moses and ask. All they had to do was look to this serpent. It's interesting, later on in 1 Kings, they still have that pole with the snake on it. And it's destroyed by that king. Because Israel had played the harlot with it. This thing that was built to be a symbol for Israel to look to in their time of distress, to be saved from snake bite death, they had turned into a false idol. Israel always struggled with the fact that God was going to take care of them. The Lord was gracious and made a way. I think we can relate. I think it's real easy for us to forget the things that God has done for us. To forget those times that we're lean and yet we still had plenty. We look at the bank account on a daily basis and we see that declining balance and can't figure out a way out, and we get stressed out and worried. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then when we look back on those times, things worked out. In sickness, we're always taken care of as God's people. And yet we often forget those times that He did take care of us. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6 and 7. Humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He may exalt you, casting all of your cares on Him, for He cares for you. I've got that in my Bible as the theme of the Bible. The overall message of the Bible. When we sum it all up into one little verse, He cares for you. We know that because from the foundation of the world, God had planned for His Son to come and make a way for us. Just like He made a way for Israel through the Red Sea, just like He made a way for Israel to drink water, to eat bread, just like He made a way for Israel to be saved from those snakes because of their own doing. God made a way because He cares for us. Acts chapter 17. And this scene here that's being preached, we really can relate to, I believe. Like a bunch of blind people, groping for the door, groping for the light switch in the dark, trying to find a way. They should seek God in verse 27 and perhaps feel their way towards Him and find Him. Yet He is actually not far from each one of us. Keep bumping that. God's going to take care of us. We're never really alone. Isaiah chapter 65, verse 24. Before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. We've looked at a lot of Old Testament examples of God taking care in miraculous ways of His people. And yet God takes care of us in similar ways. It's not so miraculous that He sends plagues or snakes and bronze serpents on a pole to look to, or if we develop a hunger that He's going to send out manna for us to go collect in the morning, or that we can really look to a snake and be healed miraculously of a snake bite. He takes care of us in similar ways. 1 John chapter 3, verse 22. And whatever we ask, we receive from Him because we keep His commandments and do what pleases Him. We're never really in trouble, are we? The Lord's always with us. It's up to us to make sure that we put our faith in Him. We see Him time and time again rescuing Israel. Punishing Israel, but rescuing Israel. Sometimes we get ourselves into trouble. Sometimes we find ourselves struggling because of problems that we've created in our life. Sometimes we find ourselves stuck between, the Red Sea and the Egyptians pressing in on us. Israel was at that point in time because they were led there by God. Not to punish Israel for doing anything wrong, they just followed God. But it was they were there to show God's power, that God's going to take care of them. Our job is to do His will so we stay out of those problems that we cause on ourselves. And it's our job to have the faith in God to take care of us when we're between the Red Sea and the Egyptians. When there's problems that we did not cause, but were there to be an example of the faithfulness of God. How much easier Israel would have had it if they had remembered that. How easy it would have been. They wouldn't have spent 40 years wandering around the wilderness, would they? They wouldn't have been surrounded by fire. They wouldn't have been invaded by snakes. The ground wouldn't have opened up and swallowed people. That happened, all of those things. Terrible, scary things. How much easier would our life be if when we find ourselves in difficult spots that we remember God is always going to take care of us. Even if it's spots that we found ourselves in, even if it's just a circumstance that we find ourselves in. God is going to provide. Whether it's a way of escape from sin, or whether it's difficult situations, He loves and cares for us. So we should cast our burdens on Him. The gospel is always open. We've always got an emergency whistle with us. We shouldn't wait till it's an emergency to speak with God. But we see Moses interceding for Israel constantly in the wilderness wanderings. We can have that same protection always with us. The invitation's open to you. Won't you come as we stand and sing?